burners in the furnace to lower the temperature inside the tower, believing this would reduce the pressure.
So they did more than one thing, right? They opened the relief valve and they turned off the heating. So hopefully reduce the temperature until again they figure out what's going on.
Nobody knew the tower was dangerously full. The operators did become concerned about the lack of flow out of the tower and began opening the valve to send liquid from the bottom of the tower to storage tanks. But this liquid was very hot. As it flowed through the heat exchanger, it suddenly raised the temperature of the liquid entering high up the tower by 141 degrees Fahrenheit. It was now about 1 p.m. Contract workers, unaware of the startup and the looming danger, returned from lunch and began a meeting in the double-wide trailer, in the corner room closest to the blowdown drum. Over the next few minutes, the hot feed entering the tower caused the liquid inside to start to boil and swell. Liquid.
So they turned off the furnace heater. Why is the liquid still getting hot and hot?
Put in the heat exchanger.
The heat exchanger is turned off.
Pressure.
The operators did one thing when they realized the temperature was still high and they turned off the furnace and it was still high. What did they do? They were concerned about not getting enough liquid back into the storage tank. So they started to recycle part of the liquid in the vessel by opening that valve. But the liquid is not cold anymore, it's hot. So you're taking very hot liquid, you're feeding it back to the tank from which you are feeding the column. So that helped to make the column even more hot. Okay?
The tower completely and began spilling into the overhead vapor line, exerting great pressure on the emergency relief valves 150 feet below. At 1:14 p.m., the 3 emergency valves opened, sending nearly 52,000 gallons of flammable liquid to the blowdown drum at the other end of the ISOM unit.
So what they're describing right now is part of the built-in safeguards in case of an emergency. They had 3 relief valves that supposedly do what? Reroute your top of whatever is coming out of your column to the knockout drum where they're supposedly gases. You're supposed to treat them before and scrub them before you send them out into the atmosphere. But in this case, they're sending out hot liquid directly to the treatment.
Liquid rose inside the blowdown drum and overflowed into a processed sewer, setting off alarms in the control room. But the high-level alarm on the blowdown drum failed to go off.
So you guys know what a blowout drum is. When you have the vented gas being sent from the column, you send them out to a unit to allow if there's any condensation that happens as a result of the cooling of the gas, that the liquid is collected safely and the gas is then sent for treatment. But here it was all liquid, so the drum got overfilled and it reached a level where the excess liquid went down the drain, sewage, right? This is hydrocarbon, very hot, that's going down to the sewage. What went wrong in the knockout drums? They said the indicator failed, or the alarm failed to go off, which means that the instrument in the knockout drum itself was not working properly.
The blowdown drum and overflowed into a processed sewer, setting off alarms in the control room. But the high-level alarm on the blowdown drum failed to go off. None of the operators knew of the catastrophe unfolding in the ISOM unit. As flammable hydrocarbons overfilled the blowdown drum, operators nearby saw a geyser of liquid and vapor erupt from the top of the stack. The equivalent of nearly a tanker truck full of hot gasoline fell to the ground and began forming a huge flammable vapor cloud.
And we know what vapor clouds do, right?
The vapor cloud expanded in just 90 seconds, engulfing the unit and the nearby trailers full of workers.
About the amount of space it's able to cover in less than 2 minutes, the vapor cloud. So that means anything that it covers is at risk of exploding, yeah, if it finds an ignition source.
25 feet from the base of the blowdown drum, two workers were parked in a pickup truck with the engine idling. As flammable vapor entered the air intake, the diesel engine began to race. The two workers fled, unable to shut off the engine. Moments later, witnesses saw the truck backfire and ignite the vapor cloud. Powerful explosions swept through the area. The blast pressure wave accelerated through the ISOM unit, causing heavy destruction and igniting fires. The workers inside the trailers were right in the path of the explosions. The fires continued to burn for hours. 12 of the 20 occupants of the double-wide trailer were killed, along with 3 workers in a trailer nearby. 180 workers were injured, many with serious burns, fractures, or other traumatic injuries. The wood and metal frame trailers were blown apart by the blasts. Firefighters struggled to rescue the injured and recover the victims. 50 large chemical storage tanks were damaged, and the ISOM unit remained shut down for more than 2 years. The disaster at BP Texas City was the most serious refinery accident ever investigated by the CSB.
Not having a good safety culture can result in something like that. If you guys open up the form,
Doctor, we cannot open the form, I think.
it's a PDF. Now, the form is available in Blackboard as a separate document. I uploaded it next to the lectures.
Okay.
If you go under content, you'll find it. It's a Word file. So on the bottom of this form, it tells you what is each of the items here. So the activity, the process, situation, or activity for which risk to people, profit, or the environment is being evaluated. So in this incident, what was being evaluated? What was the activity?
What is it said? Or what's it?
Exactly, that's the question. It could be the process, it could be whatever activity that results in harm to people, property, or the environment. So a situation or a property, what was going on that resulted in an accident? What was the activity?
Filling the tower with the gasoline.
Yeah.
It's part of a startup, right?
Yes.
Startup of the raffinate unit after maintenance operations, okay? That would be the activity. What would be the hazard? The hazard is a chemical or physical characteristic that has the potential to cause damage to people. So what was the hazard in this situation? Flammable hydrocarbonate raffinate, right? It's flammable, it can explode. And the hazard is that you have large quantity of this hazard that is being heated up during a startup operation. An incident here, this is where you give a brief description. So in the brief description, you should be able to know what happened, description of the event or some of events, along with the steps that led to one or more of the undesirable consequences. So you would have to describe what initiated the accident, what propagated the accident, and what was the impact, okay? Then you need to define in the form, what was the initiating event, the event that triggered the accident? Was it a failure of instrument? Was it not following procedures? Was it a leak? What was it? You would need to describe it. For example, failure of multiple control systems during startup operations, including the controller level alarm in the column, the knockout drum level alarm, the miscommunication. These can all be initiating events. So basically the root cause of the event that led to the accident. And then in the form, you need to define preventative and mitigative safeguards. So remember I told you to take notes?
Yes.
What were the safeguards that you found? List all of them, and then categorize which ones are preventative and which one are mitigating. What's the difference?
Preventative before it can become an accident.
Okay, can somebody else give me an example of the preventative safeguards that were in place?
Level indicators.
Level indicators, what else?
The pressure release system.
Okay, give me something other than controllers. Something other than control systems, other types of mitigative safeguard. Procedures. Operators were following procedures when they do startup, right? There was a certain procedure that, did they do it? That's something else, but there was a safeguard, there was a procedure developed. Give me an example of mitigative safeguard. So these are the ones you add in case an accident happens, right? In case something goes wrong. What were some mitigative safeguards?
When they close the valve, for example.
So one of the mitigative safeguards was procedural. In case you have high pressure buildup in the column, what should you do? You should turn off the heater or the furnace. You should open up the valve to relieve some of the pressure that's happening, right? So procedures, there were lots of things, by the way. Those are not the only things, but these are examples of what mitigative safeguards. What else could be a mitigative safeguard? Sending the gas directly to vent lines that send the gas to the knockout drum. That is part of mitigative safeguard. Those are control systems. All right, so you should be able to list all of them to be able to describe the situation. Enabling conditions, remember, and conditional modifiers. So what were the enabling conditions?
The car engine.
That would be part of the incident propagation. It's the actual ignition source, right, for the explosion to happen. Remember, enabling conditions by themselves don't cause the accident. But the vapor cloud. Not following procedures, right? Not having operators on site, not having a shift operator. Confusing procedures. Remember they said they were confused regarding the procedures. One said open, one said close the valve from the unit. So those will all be considered to be enabling conditions that if they weren't there, the accident would not have happened, right? If there were good procedures without confusion, the operators could have rerouted the liquid safely back before it got heated. But because they didn't know, they left it closed, then they started the furnace, right? Conditional modifiers. So these are the things that happen after the initiating events happens and it changes the magnitude or the consequence. Conditions that occur after initiation and impact a step in the sequence, either before or after the incident has occurred. So what would have been some conditional modifiers that change the impact of this accident?
Modifiers.
What made the accident worse? The impacts of the accident on people even worse? Why did so many people die?
They were close to the unit.
Yeah, that's a conditional modifier. Were those units officially there? No, this is porta cabins that were constructed because they were doing a major shutdown and maintenance operations. So they built those so that the maintenance team and the people who are carrying out the work can stay near the facility. That was not part of the actual setup. So that's a conditional modifier. So try to think of others. And then at the end, the last thing that you should put are the lessons learned. By the way, these lines are movable, yeah? Don't say I only need to fill up the space. Add as many as you need. Lessons learned, this is what should have been learned from this incident. So just based on what you watched, try to see what could be some lessons learned. What's the first one?
Having a good safety culture.
Having a safety culture is very important, right? And obviously PT did not have a good safety culture. What else is a lesson learned?
Regular checking from the controllers.
Maintenance of safety systems is very important. You should continuously check to make sure that those devices that you put to protect you work when you call on them. They have reliability. But in this case, reliability was almost zero. Not how many? 3 or 4 out of the systems they talked about did not work on the time frame, right? Training of employees, following procedures, knowing the procedures is very important. Administrative controls are important, right? Investment in people to be able to operate the control room is important. When you come to budget cuts, you don't cut safety, right? So there's so many lessons that could have been learned. And by the way, if you search online, go find the CSB investigation report for this accident, you will find all of that detailed information there, right? But before you do, try to see what you can fill into this form, right? By just watching the video again. All right, Yeah.
This is the first one.
this is not home.
Oh,
This is anytime we watch an incident video, we will not be watching too many, but there are a handful of videos that I'm sharing with you are considered to be major accidents. And you should be familiar with those. Okay? Take notes on them because you'll see them in a quiz or you'll see them in an exam. Before you leave this semester, I want you to know the BP Texas incident. I want you to know the Bhopal incident, the Deepwater Horizon, the North Sea accident we will take a look at. And there are many other ones that we will take a look at, but there are 8, 9 very important accidents that you should be very familiar with. All right. What are some symptoms of a weak culture? Well, we saw in the accident, what are symptoms of a weak culture? If employees feel they can leave anytime without getting permission. If the shift operator can leave without handing over. If the operator can not fulfill their job requirements by putting poor documentation, not documenting what actually happened, right? There are lots of symptoms that if I was in a management team in the company, I can tell that something is going to happen. Here are some other ones. Assign little value to process safety. Have poorly developed sense of their vulnerabilities. This is talking about if the company and the employees don't know where they might be weak when it comes to safety. Have a poor understanding of risk. Obviously, operators and shift operator did not understand what risky activities they were doing by not following instructions. Devote minimal or no resources to risk control. BP did not invest money in hiring the right operators. Overlook process safety warning signs. I'm not sure if you listened to it in the video. Early on, when they were starting up the unit and they started to feed in the liquid, they fed it and they exceeded the initial, I think, 6 feet. And they said it was normal for them to exceed what has been written in the procedures. You should not exceed 6, but it was normal for them. It was okay if you exceeded by just a little bit. So that's overlooking process safety warning signs. Practice poor housekeeping, accept and normalize poor performance. So if it was okay for employees to think like that and they can get away with it, it means they know nobody's monitoring them. Strong reliance on management to identify the hazards instead of everybody being involved. So all of these are symptoms of a weak culture. The second element under the commitment to process safety is called compliance with standards. So obviously, we know what standards are, right? Are they regulations? Are they laws?
No.
Here, this element is asking you not just to be in compliance with laws and regulations, it says compliance with standards, the best practices of what we should do and how we should do it. This element is referring to this concept here. There's something called recognized and generally accepted good engineering practices, RAGAGEP abbreviation, right? And this element basically overlaps with all of the other elements that we have in this program. This element says that it's applicable to regulations, to standards, to codes, and other requirements that are issued by either the country, issued by the state, issued by the company, issued by local government, and other organizations. And it wants you as a company to make sure that you know what all of these are. You're constantly looking for what are new ways and good recommendations of how you should operate. And you should be able to interpret and implement these requirements, make them a requirement, even though it's not law. So laws, codes, standards, good engineering practices that are developed by all organizations, other people who are experts, other companies who do similar business that we do. You should know what those are because you want to learn from them. This is a way to reduce the frequency of possibly something going wrong. Yeah. Some of the activities that companies do to address this element is they interpret or apply standards for internal use. They participate in standard developments, so they themselves try to develop good standards of how they should do something and share it in conferences. Share it publicly, publish it, make it part of your standard codes and make that available for everyone. Okay? Abdullah Daggag's company has new standard for how to store methanol, right? In addition to the regulations that are out there, their company have developed a really good practice over the years, and they feel like this should become their own standard for all companies or all businesses under his company. He publishes it, other people make use of that because they should be followed. You should develop a system to identify standards and uniformly administer and maintain the information. So this is very important. If I have to be aware of all of these standards, codes, and regulations that are developed by all of these entities, how do I regularly keep up? It means I need to develop a system that continuously checks every few months or every 6 months or every year on what is new out there as part of my review process. And if you find something new, your system should tell you how you can implement that into the company's program. Is this element clear? Yeah? Compliance with standards. It does not mean you don't comply with regulations. It means you comply with everything. Regulations, standards, codes, blah. And this element is very important because if you follow the good engineering practices, you will be able to identify and address most of these elements. You'll be able to identify your hazards because those new standards and codes have told you where might some hazards be and how you should manage them. They will give you good guidelines and procedures on how to manage the risks that they have found in their facility. And they have developed good practices on how to continuously improve their safety programs. They developed a good way to use previous incidents within the company to reduce the frequency of that incident. All of these things overlap with this element, which is following and being up to the level of all of the relevant standard codes and information related to your operation. Okay? The next element under commitment to process safety is process safety competence. Okay? Here, it's the knowledge, not just what you know as standards, it's the knowledge of your employees. It's looking at skills and resources that the company needs to have in the right places to manage its process hazards. They need to verify collectively that these skills and resources are available as a company. This information, it can be applied in different plans and management of change that the company is looking forward to in the future. This does not mean individual competency, but rather the corporate's competency. Overall, the company's competency and knowledge about related to their activities. So they develop good training programs to increase workers' levels competency, develop competency profiles. So each of you can check under your profile and see what are you very good at, what maybe you still developing on, and so on. Evaluate a unit to determine gaps in its competency. So this is a physical unit, a process unit. And as a company, if I'm trying to follow that unit's competency and its reliability and all of that, then you are able to determine gaps, hopefully, and fix them before something goes wrong. The units here could also be a section or a unit within the company in terms of people working. This unit is responsible for maintenance. So making sure that the maintenance team, do they have any competency gaps? And if they do, you try to quickly. So this is what the company doing its job to keep track and monitor and make sure they identify that they are providing the right resources and information needed to be able to verify that the information about the process is there. So skills and resources that company needs to have in the right places to manage its process hazards. For this element, we're gonna watch a video. This is the Deepwater Horizon. This happened recently in 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's trying to tell you how the company failed this element, okay? Three key actions to make sure that you have process safety competency, that you're continuously improving your knowledge and your efficiency of your operation. How should you operate this unit? How should you operate this process? You're constantly trying to look for new ways of being able to operate it better. Ensure that the appropriate information is available to employees who need it when they need it. If there's a new standard that came up, how do the employees who need that information get it? Right? Is it part of their training program? Are they required to go look for it? Or does your company have a management team that gets this information and distributes it to people? What is the way in which you're making sure the information that is needed gets to the people who need it within your facility? This is the summary of this element. Making sure that the information that is required by your employees gets to those employees. This is what this competency is, what this element is about. So please, again, open up a new file, save it for the Deepwater Horizon that took place in 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico. This time I'm not going to stop. You stop me if you have a question.
April 20th, 2010. 11 workers died and 17 were seriously injured by an explosion on the Deepwater Horizon, an offshore drilling rig located approximately 50 miles off the coast of Louisiana. The rig burned for 2 days, eventually sinking and triggering the largest oil spill in U.S. history, as oil and gas spewed up from the sea floor. The Deepwater Horizon had been drilling an oil well in 5,000 feet of water in an area of the Gulf of Mexico known as the Macondo Prospect. In 2010, the CSB launched an investigation to examine the technical, organizational, and regulatory factors that contributed to the accident. During the investigation, the CSB made new findings about why a key piece of safety equipment, the Deepwater Horizon's blowout preventer, failed to seal the well during the emergency.
I'm sorry, I said I'm not going to stop, but I realize that not all of you might know what CSB stands for. It's the Chemical Safety Board. This is a government agency that is responsible for investigating any industrial accidents to determine what they just said, right? And to share the experience with others so that they don't make the same mistake.
To the accident. During the investigation, the CSB made new findings about why a key piece of safety equipment, the Deepwater Horizon's blowout preventer, failed to seal the well during the emergency. These new findings help explain why the accident was so devastating, and the CSB cautioned that other blowout preventers currently in use could fail in similar ways. Drilling an offshore well involves creating a pathway between the drilling rig and oil and gas reservoirs trapped beneath the sea floor. A deep hole, or well bore, is drilled through layers of subsea rock and sediment. These rocky layers can contain trapped water, crude oil, and natural gas under pressure. An unplanned flow of these well fluids into the wellbore, known in the industry as a kick, can be dangerous. Without careful management, a kick can lead to a blowout, the uncontrolled release of flammable oil and gas from the well. A blowout can be catastrophic, since oil and gas reaching the drilling rig can quickly find an ignition source, leading to a fire or explosion, endangering the lives of the drilling crew. To prevent kicks, drillers pump a dense slurry called drilling mud into the well, creating a barrier between the undersea oil and gas and the piping that leads to the rig. If this mud barrier fails or is somehow removed, the safety of the drilling crew depends on a critical piece of equipment located on the sea floor called the blowout preventer, or BOP.
Any questions?
The BOP is a complex electrically and hydraulically powered device that is essential for controlling the well and, in an emergency situation, preventing a disaster on the platform high above on the sea surface. The BOP is connected to the rig by a large diameter pipe called a riser. If a kick occurs, the blowout preventer is designed to prevent flammable oil and gas from traveling up the riser to the drilling rig. This is done by sealing the area around the drill pipe, known as the annular space. To do this, the crew can manually close pipe rams and donut-shaped rubber devices known as annular preventers. If those devices should fail to work, the last resort is a pair of sharp metal blades which form a blind shear ram designed to cut the drill pipe and seal the well. The blind shear ram can be activated manually or by automated emergency systems. At approximately 8:45 p.m. on April 20th, 2010, a kick occurred in the Macondo well. Oil and gas entered the wellbore undetected, eventually passing above the blowout preventer and traveling quickly up the riser toward the Deepwater Horizon and the 126 people on board. Just after 9:40 p.m., drilling mud, forced upwards by the rising oil and gas, suddenly blew out onto the rig. Crew members responded by closing the upper annular preventer in the BOP. However, this did not seal the well as intended, and flammable oil and gas continued to flow into the riser toward the rig. Next, the crew closed a pipe ram. This successfully closed the annular space and sealed the well, but tragically this proved to be only a temporary fix. Oil and gas that were already above the pipe ram continued to flow inexorably toward the Deepwater Horizon. As the oil and gas escaped the riser onto the rig, the pressure dropped in the annular space above the pipe ram. But at the same time, the pressure in the drill pipe climbed substantially. The drill pipe was closed at the top, but oil and gas continued to flow in from the reservoir below. After extensive analysis, the CSB concluded that this large difference in pressure likely caused the drill pipe to buckle, essentially bending the pipe off-center inside the blowout preventer. The buckling pushed sections of the drill pipe outside of the reach of the blind shear ram blades. This would eventually prove to be catastrophic. At approximately 9:49 p.m., the flammable hydrocarbons found an ignition source, and the first explosions shook the Deepwater Horizon. With the drill pipe buckled, the explosion and subsequent loss of electrical and hydraulic power from the rig likely activated an automated system on the blowout preventer known as the AMF Deadman, which closes the blind shear ram and cuts the drill pipe. This emergency system is designed to activate when electric power, hydraulic pressure, and communications from the rig have been lost.
Since you guys don't have any questions, can somebody tell me in like 4 sentences what happened so far?
Firstly, the blow-up preventer was failed,
Mhm.
and they could not seal the rig before it was.
They were not able to seal the well, right?
Yeah,
And
and as there is a difference in pressure, so
so
it
they
happened.
did seal it. They didn't seal it, but they tried to seal it using one of the control systems, but it was temporary because, as you mentioned, the pressure difference made the pipe bend and buckle. So that's 2 things. What happened after that?
Because the drill buckled, the last preventative measure couldn't close the drill properly,
Mm-hmm.
so the gas went up to the.
So eventually we have mud coming off the top of the rig, followed by oil and gas, which had initially passed before the clamp tried to close down the well. And it caught an ignition source and it exploded. And when it exploded, they just talked about something called the AMF Deadman. This is an automatic control system that's supposed to be activated in case you lose power. And it's supposed to take care of everything, right? In case nobody has access to control systems. So a dead man means that nobody's alive to take care of things on top automated system needs to come in and seal the well properly.
AMF Deadman's system was operated by two redundant control systems on the BOP, known as the yellow pod and the blue pod. The redundancy is supposed to increase the reliability of the system in an emergency situation. The yellow and blue pods worked independently of each other and were comprised of identical enclosed computer systems and sets of solenoid valves.
So it's redundancy.
When
just in
activated,
case one
The
goes
solenoid
other
valves
works.
controlled important BOP functions, such as closing the blind shear ram. If electrical power from the rig was lost, as happened on April 20th, 2010, both the yellow and blue control pods contained backup 27-volt and 9-volt batteries to power emergency functions. The 9-volt batteries powered computers that would activate the solenoid valves, which were powered by the 27-volt batteries. However, evidence indicates the blue pod had been miswired at some time before the BOP was lowered onto the seafloor. This caused the pod's 27-volt battery to drain and made it impossible to operate the solenoid valve for the blind shear ram on the night of the accident.
So the
And
backup-
within the redundant yellow pod, the solenoid for the blind shear ram had been miswired. The solenoid valves were controlled by two coils of electrical wire. These two coils were designed to work in concert, generating a magnetic field strong enough to operate the valve. But within the miswired solenoid valve, the two coils actually opposed each other, leaving the valve paralyzed. Only a third unplanned failure allowed the yellow pod to operate. On the night of the accident, one of the 9-volt batteries that powered the solenoid valve's computer had failed. As a result, the affected computer system could not initiate the command to energize the miswired coil. Had both coils of the miswired solenoid valve been energized, the two coils would have generated opposing forces on the valve. The solenoid valve would have remained closed, and the blind shear ram would never have been closed.
So it's by sheer luck that because of another failure, that the valve did partially what it was supposed to do. Because if the batteries were both working, the ram, this valve would not have allowed the ram to open. And alhamdulillah, one of the batteries was not working, so the valve was partially able to do what it needed to do.
However, the failed battery rendered one coil inoperable and most likely allowed the other coil to open the solenoid valve by itself. This in turn initiated closure of the blind shear ram. This should have cut the drill pipe and sealed the well, greatly reducing the impact of the accident. But because the drill pipe was buckled and off-center inside the blowout preventer, it was trapped and only partially cut. With the failure of this last-ditch measure, there was nothing left to stop the massive oil spill and the destruction of the rig.
So at the end, all of the control systems in place, including the dead man's AMF switch, were not able to completely seal the well. So although it partially sealed it, still oil was gushing into the sea for weeks until they tried to resolve it. So how is this related to process safety competency? In the video, CSB said that they're concerned that similar blowout preventer valves will have similar issues as a result of previous kicks that might have made their pipes off-center. And if other companies don't use that information that the CSB put out there and try to make sure that their employees and their control systems and their operators and the management team responsible for operating the rigs have this information, then those rigs are also at risk of having similar accidents. Okay? So that means part of my process safety or Ahmed's process safety program in his company is that they require that their safety management team checks regularly 6 months. And part of the things that they check for are new CSB investigation recommendations and reports. And they see how those are relevant to their process. If they have that in their program, they will come across this incident and this lesson learned and the warning that CSB sent to those who have rigs that you might have a similar issue with your blowout preventer and you need to check for it. So then your team will go check during next maintenance. They'll seal the well, make sure everything is okay, check the pipe, And if everything is good, then great. You see how important this element is? If you don't have part of your safety program, something where you go check for new lessons learned or new ways of doing something that affect your business, then you're putting your company at risk. Okay? So this is, if you're weak in this element, you're putting your company at risk of a potential incident.
During its investigation, the CSB identified a mechanism that likely caused the drill pipe to be buckled around the time of the explosion. This mechanism is called effective compression. Although effective compression had previously been noted as a hazard in other drilling operations, it had never been identified as a problem affecting drill pipe during well operations. Effective compression occurs because although pipe may appear to be perfectly straight, in fact it has minute bends and irregularities, invisible to the naked eye. Along these bends, the side of the pipe that is curved outward is slightly longer and has more surface area than the other side. When there is a large difference in pressure between the inside and outside of the pipe, as happened on April 20th, 2010, the longer side of the pipe experiences a larger bending force. Eventually, this force can become great enough to buckle even heavy pipe. This is an important finding, CSB investigators said, because the same conditions of differential pressure could occur at other drilling rigs, even if a crew successfully shuts in a well. The CSB warned this could make existing blowout preventer designs less effective in emergency situations. In the case of the Deepwater Horizon accident, the buckled drill pipe prevented the blind shear ram from sealing the well. Oil and gas from the well flowed out of the buckled drill pipe and into the Gulf of Mexico for 87 days. A reported 5 million barrels of oil eventually spilled, causing one of the worst environmental disasters in United States history.
So you see the impact on environment, people, and definitely property as well as reputation. Somebody here said that technique also considered business reputation as one of the key impacts of accidents that the company was concerned with. All right. Element 4, this is workforce involvement. All of these are related to making sure the company has a good pillar on committing to process safety. This one has to do with how you engage your workforce. So the broad involvement of operating and maintenance personnel in process safety activities to make sure that the lessons learned by the people closest to the process are considered and addressed. This is trying to help the company later that if I involve everybody that's involved in operation as well as maintenance, they're the people that are working closest to these pieces of equipment. And they're the ones that know what can go wrong. They're the ones that have a better understanding of what are some of the near misses, some of the mistakes, some of the issues that they have. And so to make sure you have workforce involvement, you develop, lead, or participate in workforce involvement efforts at the corporate, business, and plant level. As a supervisor, you regularly lead discussions around process safety concerns or issues with your operating personnel because, again, they will let you know what are some issues that might be there. And as a worker, you provide constructive feedback when your supervisor asks, aimed at improving process safety and track feedback to resolution. So as an employee, once you make a recommendation, come back to your supervisor a week later and say, so what have we done about this issue that I raised? And they should be able to tell you, we raised it to management, management is processing it, next week we're going to do something, or next month we're going to see this change. If it was, we're lacking resources, the company should provide those resources. If it was a near miss, then it should be shared with the safety team so they can report it and learn from that incident and hopefully identify the hazard and correct for it. So by doing this kind of activity, you're helping the company continuously identify potential sources of issues within your facility. The fifth element we will finalize today with process safety commitments is stakeholder outreach. So element 4, you want to get your workforce involved, right? In element 5, you want to get these stakeholders, people who have a vested interest or who are impacted by your business, to be involved. And here, a process for identifying, engaging, and maintaining good relationship with external stakeholder groups. This would include surrounding community. It will include suppliers of your raw materials, your customers, the government agencies, the regulatory bodies, professional societies, contractors, includes fire departments in the community and so on, right? And how do you do that? You can have lead community action panel meetings. These are something that are practiced by companies all over the US and I think even in Asia and Europe. This is where the company has an awareness session every, few years to the community to let them know what changes they have made that impact their operations, that could impact the community to make them more safe. Work with lead community to create a community action panel to facilitate the meeting. Develop practices or standards to coordinate and manage major offsite accident risks to include communications with stakeholders. How do you let the stakeholders know that something is about to happen? How do you let the stakeholders know that you're doing a maintenance program? How do you let the stakeholders know that you're currently experiencing an issue in the facility and you're not operating under normal conditions, so you might see a lot of flaring for the next 2 days. That information needs to be processed. So if I'm sitting at home and I see a flare very high, I don't feel like I need to run out of the city, right? If this is an okay practice for a short period of time, how do you communicate that? This is what this element is about. Being able to communicate with stakeholder, all types of things that impact them. Coordinating an emergency response simulation or drill in the community. That's part of that activity. Usually, systems are in place and they're used by companies to allow participation of workers in the development implementation of these types of outreach activities. Okay, any questions? All right, so the benefits having a good stakeholder outreach is you share information with industrial peers will help to improve their safety performance. Sharing information in proactive ways with the community and government will build trust. And if you have trust from the community, then that's a good thing for your operations, right? They know that if there's something wrong, you will let them know. Promoting openness and responsiveness with an effective outreach program will also increase your stakeholders' confidence in the company. All right. I'll ask you 2 questions, and then I'll let you go. So, the risk-based process safety pillars, which ones of these are there? Managing risk, learn from experience, commitment to process safety, understanding hazards and risk, or process safety management. There are 4. I'll tell you. Which ones are they?
All of them except the fourth one.
So tell me one by one. Which one? Managing risk?
Yes.
Okay.
Learning from experience.
Yes. Okay.
Commitment to process safety.
This is the one we just finished, right?
Yes.
It's process safety management.
Is it process safety management?
Yes.
It's this one. Understanding hazards and risks. These are the 4 pillars that we have here. We'll talk about this understanding hazards and risks at the next class, inshallah, on Wednesday. Let me ask you one last question and then you can go. Verification that the company collectively has these skills and resources. Application of this information in succession planning and management of organizational changes. Which element is this? Workforce involvement, process safety culture, process safety competency, compliance with standards.
Competency.
Is it process safety competency?
Compliance with standards?
Is it compliance with standards? So it's not process safety culture.
No.
It's not workforce involvement. It's one of these 2.
Competency. Competency.
Compliance.
So we have competency,
Yes. Yes.
skills and resources that company needs to have the right places to manage the process, verification that the company collectively has these skills and resources. This is competency, and the compliance, interpretation of the standards, codes, and standards. So it's which one?
Competency.
It's competency. This is the first. All right. I'll see you on Wednesday.